Hi, my name is Lisa from Boogaard Attorneys, and today I'll be discussing a retention policy and register. The basis of implementing a retention policy can be found under Section 14 of POPIA, which provides that a responsible party must retain personal information only for such period as is necessary to achieve the purpose for which it is collected or subsequently processed, unless one of the following applies. Retention of the record is required or authorized by law. The responsible party reasonably requires the record for lawful purposes related to its functions or activities. The records are retained for purposes of a contract between the parties thereto. The data subject has consented to the retaining of the record. Records of personal information may be retained for periods in excess of those contemplated above for historical, statistical, or research purposes, provided that the responsible party has established appropriate safeguards against the records being used for any other purpose. I've addressed previously that the POPIA is principle-based legislation. The nature and extent of the activities and operations of a responsible party, as applied against the aid conditions and other provisions of POPIA and its regulations, means there is no one-size-fits-all approach to compliance. However, with a solid understanding of what personal information is processed by the business and the purpose behind such processing, one may find it beneficial to develop and implement a retention of records policy and register to better manage retention periods and related considerations, given that the nature and extent of records may be extensive and difficult to otherwise keep track of. Of course, technology utilized and approaches may differ from organization to organization. If an organization wishes to develop and implement a retention policy, certain content that may be addressed could be the scope of the policy, indicating what subject matter is covered in the policy. For instance, the retention of records in hard copy and electronic format, for example, as well as any other content, perhaps the destruction of records as an example. The policy may also address who is responsible for the administration of the policy, for instance, the information officer and deputy information officers. The policy may also address the manner in which records are destroyed or deleted when no longer authorized to be retained, and indicating that the responsible party will destroy or delete a record of personal information or de-identify it as soon as reasonably practicable after the responsible party is no longer authorized to retain the record in a manner which prevents its reconstruction in an intelligible form. That wording is very much aligned with the text of POPIA. The policy may also address content addressing how legal proceedings may impact the retention period or interrupt it. The policy may also indicate or address expectations of staff around storage of personal information, transmitting of organization information externally, and issues of confidentiality. The policy may also address the records pertaining to how the records pertaining to a decision about a data subject are kept, for instance, whether this is governed by a period prescribed by law or code of conduct, or if those do not exist, the policy may indicate that the data subject, the retention period will be that which allows the data subject reasonable opportunity to request access to the record. Content that may also be covered is general principles pertaining to correspondence and internal communications and how these are retained and for what period. Different principles may be established according to whether a document is perhaps related to another document or record which is retained for a specific period, perhaps in terms of a contract, or, for example, a record that is required to be kept under the Companies Act. we would also likely look at the significance in nature of the communication and for how long it is going to be significant in nature, to determine if there's any principles which can be established around correspondence and internal communication. You could also differentiate between electronic communications, and again, in this regard, you would perhaps look at whether the electronic communication is work-related or not, and the relevance and significance of the communication, and then also determine if the communications are uploaded to a cloud, and the time period within which work-related emails are to be deleted, or considerations around the point. An organization may wish to keep a retention register to better manage the retention periods of specific categories of records, and this could be done in a table format, distinguishing between record types, addressing whether records contain personal information, setting out retention periods, and the basis of retaining records aligned with POPIA. So examples of record types could be contracts concluded by the company, company law records, and HR records. The list is of course not exhaustive, and this could be quite voluminous. The register could also set out personal information and whether or not the record or a record contains personal information. It would likely set out the retention period, of course, at this time period itself, as well as how it is determined to commence and lapse, or if same is permanent in nature, such as company and corporation documents. Then it may also be beneficial to clarify the basis on which a record is still retained, aligned with POPIA. So for example, and one or more of these may apply, such as the retention of the record is still necessary for the purpose it has been collected. It is still required or authorized by law to be retained. It is required for lawful purposes related to functions or activities of the responsible party. The data subject has consented to a longer retention period, or it is retained for historical, statistical, or research purposes, provided that reasonable safeguards have been adopted by the responsible party to avoid the record for being utilized for any other purpose. So that is an overview of the retention policy and register. Again, of course, it's stressed that there's no one-size-fits-all method of compliance with POPIA. It is principle-based, and an organization would have to determine the need for and the benefit of the retention register, of course, to properly manage records and the retention periods, particularly dependent on the size of the organization. It may be very beneficial to adopt these policies and registers. So thank you for listening to this presentation, and we look forward to bringing you another one in the near future.